Beneath the first snow of the season, a girl walked across the square with bare hands, a faded dress, and eyes no one remembered the color of. No one called her by name. They called her the Mercer maid, the quiet thing who moved like a shadow but looked at folks like she could peel back the skin they smiled behind. This morning, she sat in the defendant's chair in a town that didn't care what was true, only what was easy to believe. They said she poisoned the mayor with a drop of belladonna. But no one asked why the poison was found in his own desk drawer. No one asked how a girl too poor to buy a pair of decent boots got her hands on a toxin that kills without a trace. They weren't after justice. They were after someone to wear the blame. And she, no coat, no kin, no tears, sat there quiet as a stone in the riverbed of their verdicts. Because she knew, in Eden Hollow, folks didn't try guilt. They tried bloodlines, and hers had been sentenced long ago. Winter didn't arrive with a storm, but seeped in like guilt at first light, through a door not fully latched, through the threadbare cuffs of a worn dress. The snow had started 3 days ago, but only this morning did it settle for good. Quiet, thin, hard, like a kind of faith that had long since died. Isabel Kane crossed the square of Eden Hollow as the church bell struck 7. No one walked beside her. The wind gathered beneath the hem of her faded skirt. Her hands were bare, fingers purple with cold. The leather boots she wore, straps broken since last winter, were stiff with frozen mud and cracked at the heel. The courthouse wasn't far, but the path to it stretched longer than a lifetime. People weren't there to weigh justice. They came to watch. No one remembered her name. They called her the Mercer maid, or that quiet girl who stares too long. She'd mopped blood from the mayor's bedroom floor, scrubbed broken glass from under the dining table, knelt beneath it while he was drunk, catching every slurred insult like salt pressed into a burn. Now he was dead. Benjamin Mercer, mayor of Eden Hollow, had been found convulsing in his red library armchair, white foam spilling from his mouth. She was the only one there. They said it was poison. Belladonna. A single drop could still a beating heart. No one asked why the poison was found in his desk drawer. No one asked why his health had been fading for months. No one asked if she could even afford poison when her soles were peeling and her coat didn't exist. They didn't come to ask. They came to conclude. The courthouse sat at the end of Main Street, between Mrs. Golding's dress shop and the sweetbread bakery. Wooden benches filled fast. The smell of damp wool, pipe smoke, and quiet anticipation thickened the air. Women sat in clusters under fur-trimmed hats, peering through black veils with curiosity. Men removed their hats, chewing tobacco, nodding as the judge entered, as if everything was already settled. Children were brought along, hushed as though for church. Isabel was led in without chains, but the cold gripped her like iron. She sat in the defendant's chair, eyes cast down, hands on her lap, back straight, as if she'd practiced her whole life not to break. Her court-appointed lawyer, Mr. Blackwell, looked like a man in a hurry to get home for lunch. His collar was wrinkled, his papers spilled. He never met her gaze once that morning. The prosecutor, on the other hand, thrived. Loud voice, quick feet. Pacing like a preacher in his pulpit, he held up a small glass vial as though it were a holy relic. "Belladonna," he proclaimed, "the devil's herb, 1 drop, and the heart surrenders." Gasps fluttered. A woman clutched her scarf. A man nodded solemnly. No one asked why the vial had been in Mercer's own drawer. No one asked why a girl with no name, no property, and no place to go would kill the one man still giving her a job, even if that man was cruel, because they weren't there to judge a crime. They were there to judge a station. Isabel didn't cry. She didn't plead. When someone from the benches hissed, "Witch-hearted whore," she didn't flinch. She simply looked back. The way she sat, still, silent, unnerved them, as if she didn't need pity, as if they were punishing someone who had already lost everything. She remembered the winter she turned 12, when her stepfather locked her in the stable for spilling ink. She remembered the cold sinking into her spine like a thin blade. But the cold here in the courtroom didn't come from the snow. It came from their eyes. The baker who once handed her a roll each morning now looked away. The stable boy who used to whistle behind her back now bowed his head. The town medic, who had once gently touched her wrist to check a bruise, now sat stiff as stone. Judge York, Mercer's lifelong friend, read the opening statements like a man delivering the Lord's Prayer. "Justice is the light that guides us," he declared. But that light never reached where she sat. When Mr. Blackwell finally rose, his voice creaked like an old hinge. "Your Honor, I believe there is no direct evidence." "Sit down," said the judge. A ripple of laughter. She didn't move, because she had long understood. There are places where truth isn't welcome at the table. At the midday recess, court adjourned. People poured into the streets as if leaving a stage play. "Poor Mr. Mercer," someone sighed. "Just look at her," another replied. "You can tell." She was led through a side door, a small room, cold stove, splintered desk, wooden chair. She sat. No one asked if she needed anything. No one offered water. She didn't ask. Only the wind spoke, curling through a cracked window pane, tugging loose a strand of hair from her bun. She left it. Outside, Eden Hollow readied for lunch. People would retell the morning like scripture over cornbread and roast hen. They'd talk of the cold look in her eyes, of how she didn't weep when her name was spoken alongside death. No one would mention the bruises on her neck. No one would ask why her sleeves hung empty at the wrists. The trial would resume after noon. The wind howled again through the cracks, and Isabel Kane, the girl with no name, no coat, no one to stand beside her, sat tall in a world that had already chosen to name her guilty, long before she ever spoke her first word. The afternoon dragged by like broken clock hands, marked only by the sound of the gavel, the shuffle of boots, and a quiet cough behind wool scarves. No one left their seat, not because they believed the truth would be revealed, but because they didn't want to miss the moment someone was pulled down like a scarecrow in a field of burnt grass. Isabel sat there, in that gray-washed room dulled by smoke and winter, her back still straight, her eyes dry, hands resting lightly on her lap, as though waiting for a gust of wind, perhaps, or a strand of straw to brush her cheek. No wind came, only accusation. Judge York sat with arms crossed, not from any moral weight, but from the return of rheumatism in his joints. He'd drunk whiskey with Mercer, rode beside him through cypress woods, and now, perched high on a carved bench, he read the charges like scripture carved from salt, not heavy, not light, only cold. "That girl," the prosecutor said, his finger snapping like a whip, "was taken in by the mayor. Given food, a place to stay." He paused to swallow, like the words tasted foul. "And she poisoned him like a dog biting the hand that fed her." No one spoke in her defense. Isabel turned slightly toward Mr. Blackwell. The man meant to protect her, but he only kept his head bowed, drawing circles along the torn edge of his notes. Whatever belief he once tucked in his coat pocket had fallen out long ago. All that remained was the wish to finish quickly, to catch the southbound train. "Why doesn't she speak?" someone in the front row whispered. "Silence is guilt," another answered with a shrug. But no one asked why she truly stayed silent. No one noticed the faded bruises beneath her collar. No one remembered the look in her eyes at the mayor's birthday, when his wife lay fevered upstairs, and Isabel had been made to kneel beneath the staircase until the clock struck midnight. No one wanted to remember. Those who had once looked on her kindly now folded their hands like in prayer. Those who'd once asked her to mend shirts or fetch water now turned away. Silent strangers. She did not blame them. Cold didn't always come from the sky. A long pause settled over the room like ash from a fire gone out. No one spoke. No one looked at her. Only the prosecutor kept moving, hands carving the air with images. A girl who crept through hallways, a silence that signals deceit, a stare too steady to be clean. She sat there, like a scarecrow in a winter field, still, silent, but unbroken. Then suddenly, a crack of the courtroom door, loud as an axe splitting dry wood. Heads turned. A boy, mud-splashed boots, shirt half untucked, eyes bright like shattered glass catching light. Jamie, the stable hand, who once left sugar crystals on the kitchen sill for her. "Wait!" he cried, breath ragged. I found this." In his hand, a crumpled piece of paper, corners creased and dusted with wood shavings, in Mr. Mercer's desk, bottom drawer, under the lining. A ripple passed through the courtroom, the judge's brow furrowed. "Bring it here." Jamie stumbled forward. His hands shook as he handed the letter to the clerk. No one moved. The prosecutor narrowed his eyes. Blackwell blinked for the first time in 2 hours. The judge opened the letter. His gaze moved down the page. The silence that followed didn't belong to Isabel for once. It belonged to the room. At last, he folded it shut, set it down, breathed in. Unsigned, unverified, inadmissible. One sentence, one gavel strike, one flicker of hope shattered on a wooden floor. Jamie stood frozen. A single melted snowflake slid from his sleeve to the ground. Isabel didn't look back. She didn't need to. She was well acquainted with how quickly belief died in towns like this. The trial continued. The motions now wrote, the lines rehearsed. Everyone knew. The script had been written long before the first snowfall. The words spoken now were just the final bricks sealing the verdict's wall. In the corner, Jamie stood still. His eyes never left her. The girl who'd once splinted a horse's cracked hoof for him, who once slipped him scraps of bread in a folded napkin. And now she sat in flames no one tried to put out. When the church bell tolled 4, Judge York called a recess until morning. The room emptied slowly. Whispers resumed. Retellings began, of the prosecutor's cutting words, of the way she never blinked. No one spoke of the boy. No one mentioned the letter. Outside, snow fell again, not harsh, just enough to cover the footprints of a boy who'd run across town to bring the truth and erase the last trace of hope behind him. Left behind in the courtroom, Isabel remained alone on the wooden bench, still and upright, like a figure carved from straw, waiting for wind to pass through. But somewhere beneath the torn fabric and the thin arms, something had not snapped. It was only waiting for the weather to change. Night slipped into Eden Hollow like black smoke through a leaking roof. No wind, no moon. Only snow falling steadily, as if the earth itself was whispering over what the living wished to bury. In the jailhouse behind the sheriff's office, the stove hadn't been lit since morning, The air was thick with the scent of damp timber and rusted iron, heavy enough you could scrape it with your nails. Isabel sat on a sagging mattress gone moldy at the edges, its shape hollowed like the back of someone long bedridden. Her spine leaned against the cold stone wall, boots damp beneath her feet, hands resting on knees. Her shoulders didn't shake, but her back was no longer straight the way it had been in court. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to breathe slow. Not because she was calm, just tired. There was no wind now. But from beyond the heavy door came footsteps. Slow, steady, weighted. As if the man approaching carried years he no longer wished to remember. No one visited at this hour. No one came to see the girl accused of murder. The outer door creaked open. Isabel didn't move. Leather boots struck the uneven wood floor. Each step thudded like a hammer pulled from some old distance, and something in it felt familiar. She looked up when a shadow stretched across the cell bars. A man stood there, tall frame, broad shoulders, a long ash-gray coat dusted with snow and dirt. His hat sat low, hiding half his face, but the eyes beneath that brim were unmistakable. Reese Callahan, once Mercer's right hand in gold convoys and backroom deals, the silent one in the corner when Mercer roared, but also the one who had stopped his hand one rainy night, just before it struck her. Then he'd vanished. No farewell. Just one morning, the stable empty, the saddle gone. Some said he died in a border brawl. Others whispered he'd been silenced. She hadn't expected to see him again. His voice came dry and low, like old timber grinding against stone. If you want out, wait till morning. Nothing more. Nothing less. He didn't touch the bars. Didn't say her name. Then turned and walked away, leaving the scent of old gunpowder and saddle leather in his wake. The door shut. No lock turned, but it was enough. Enough to know he was real. Isabel didn't call after him. Didn't dare believe. But that night, she didn't sleep. Not from fear, but because, for the first time in months drowned in contempt and indifference, someone had stepped into her shadow without flinching, had stood there, not asking, not saving, just seeing. Before dawn, the town still held its hush like an abandoned chapel. But at the saloon down the street, once owned by a man named Whitlock before gambling debts stripped it away, the oil lamp still burned. The barkeep polished a glass that had no dirt left to lose, eyes glancing sideways toward the corner booth. There sat Reese, hat still on, coffee cold in his hand. A revolver rested half-exposed at his side, as if hiding it would be a waste of time. He didn't drink, didn't smoke, just stared through the fogged window toward the courthouse. The old piano man shuffled over. His fingers trembled, but his eyes still held light. "You come back. For her?" Reese didn't look up. "I came back for a debt." The man nodded, didn't understand, but nodded anyway, as if he'd just heard a line from an old hymn, strange but impossible to ignore. Back in the cell, Isabel remained still. Her eyes red from the sleepless night, but something behind them had shifted. Not hope. Memory. She remembered a night long ago, when Mercer was too drunk to stand and made her stay standing in the center of the room until he passed out. Reese had been there, leaning in the doorway. He hadn't said a word. But after Mercer stumbled away, it was Reese who tossed her a dry towel, without a word. It hadn't saved her. But she'd made it through that night, because his presence, quiet, spare, was enough to remind her she hadn't disappeared. And now, he'd returned. She didn't know why. didn't know if she could trust again. But as the pale edge of morning bled over the church roof and the bells rang their cold, familiar tone, she felt something stir inside her chest, not belief, but the faint shift of something that had never truly died. There was no key in the lock, no promise spoken aloud, only the name Rhys Callahan, like a trace of old smoke drifting through a cold kitchen, leaving behind the scent of ash that reminds a body it once had fire. That morning, Eden Hollow spoke no loud words. The saloon opened late. The church bells didn't ring. Even the wind held its breath, as though the whole town had paused, not out of reverence, but remembrance. Rhys Callahan returned before the sun had cleared the steeple, his long coat dusted in ash and road, hat pulled low. He walked the square like a man who belonged nowhere, and yet no one dared stop him. The blacksmith let his hammer hang. A barber froze, straight razor suspended on the bare throat of his customer. Because Rhys wasn't an outlaw. He was the reason law remembered it had limits. In the courtroom, Isabel sat where she always had. Her shoulders no longer braced but not yet released. Her dress was faded. Sleeves hung empty. She didn't look around. She didn't need to. She knew the weight of eyes that smiled like flowers but cut like blades. Judge York climbed the bench slower than before. His eyes were red. His voice reading the sentence no longer steady, but still the same words. Still that slow pull of syllables, like peeling skin from another's back without a knife. The court finds. A chair in the middle row scraped. A man stood. Tall, ash-gray coat, steady hands. "Wait," he said. Heads turned, breath stopped. A child hiccuped, quickly muffled by a wool-gloved mother. Rhys stepped into the aisle. No one stopped him, no one brave or foolish enough. He paused in the center of the room. "She is my wife." One sentence, an earthquake. No one breathed. Isabel turned her head. Slowly, just enough to see the straightness of his back, the steadiness of his legs, and the strength in a voice she thought the world had long since broken. Judge York inhaled, as if bracing for a storm. "State your name." "Rhys Callahan," he said, not loudly, but each word hit the floor like brick laid on stone. The prosecutor leapt up. "Impossible. No record of any legal marriage." Rhys reached inside his coat, slowly, without threat, produced a folded slip of paper, one edge scorched, the seal faint but visible. "Marriage certificate," he said. "Filed in Dust Creek, 2 years ago." Judge York took it. His hands trembled. Glasses sat crooked. He read. 3 full minutes. Said nothing. The gallery buzzed. Married? Her? Since when? Why didn't anyone know? Isabel looked at Rhys for the first time since he entered. Not to ask, but to confirm that what she was seeing was real. Not salvation, but someone standing with her, when the world had already dug her grave in silence. "Even if this is real," the judge finally said, "it does not change the charge." "No," Rhys replied, "but it explains why no one stood by her." He turned to the crowd, met their gaze, no fury, no contempt, only truth. "Because none of you knew." The silence that followed was heavier than any before. Isabel's hands trembled. Not from cold, not from fear, but because, for the first time in all those winters, she wasn't just a body alone in a field of wind. She was someone, with a name called aloud, under a shared roof, even if that roof was only made of words. The gavel struck, pointless. "This is highly irregular," Judge York said. "Justice," Rhys answered, "has never been a regular thing." A few heads bowed. Blackwell blinked. still said nothing. The scarecrow girl of yesterday today had a name, a paper, a man in the center of the room who said she was no longer invisible. No one knew if the paper was real, but they knew this: no one had ever spoken for her. Until someone did. Called her wife. Isabel didn't cry, but something in the silence shifted. Not broken, just beginning. Afternoon sank over Eden Hollow like ash settling on an old roof. No smoke, no sound, only the scent of something burned that no one ever named. No one went home after the trial, not out of curiosity, but because they no longer knew how to walk forward in the silence they themselves had made. Rhys Callahan still stood where he had spoken the words, "She is my wife." Isabel still sat in the defendant's seat. Her hands rested in her lap, not clenched, not yet open. Judge York had adjourned the hearing, citing pending verification of evidence. But everyone knew the truth. No one in that room had the voice left to read a verdict written long before anyone thought to question it. No one met her eyes. No one knew how to begin walking back from the road they had taken too far. Then someone stood. The first. It was Mrs. Dora Lee, the baker's wife. Faded cotton dress, gray wool shawl, eyes hollow from years of pre-dawn bread-making. She folded her hands across her middle and spoke, low and clear, each word like flour falling on a clean table. "I saw Mr. Mercer strike her, behind the bakery last spring, and I turned away." No one clapped, no one nodded, but the second stood. Sarah, the former maid at the Mercer house. Her voice was barely a whisper. "She had a fever for 3 days, still had to scrub the floors. I begged him to let her rest. He laughed, said if I spoke again, I'd lose my pay." She didn't cry. She only looked at Isabel, then sat down, like finishing a prayer she'd never dared begin aloud. Rhys said nothing. He didn't need to. He placed one hand on the wooden rail, lowered his head slightly, as though listening to the things justice had long pretended not to hear. Then the town doctor, silver hair, brass spectacles. He stepped forward, trembling slightly as he held up a stack of yellowed notes, edges curling, still smelling faintly of antiseptic. "I treated her," he said. "Bruised ribs, broken finger, mild concussion. I didn't file a report, didn't log it in the records. I was afraid." A breeze slipped through the cracks in the wood frame. Pages lifted, soft as breath. Proof, without a lawyer. The woman who had served tea at that birthday party stood. Jamie, the stable boy, stepped up beside her. The old pianist from the saloon nodded slowly, like bowing to the final note of a song he never finished. No one blamed each other. No one blamed Rhys. He hadn't asked anyone to confess, hadn't called names. He just stood there, like a pine rooted in snow, and recited each bruise he'd witnessed, each time she collapsed with fever, each time he placed a damp cloth on her forehead in the night, while downstairs echoed with whiskey and boot heels. Isabel did not cry, but something softened in her gaze. Not forgiveness, just the weight of being seen, truly seen, and named for what she was, a survivor. The town grew still. The girl they had once marked as cruel now looked like someone pulled from fire, not vindicated, just finally looked at long enough to be known. It seemed the last words had been spoken, but just as the judge prepared to speak again, a cough, harsh and sharp, cut through the stillness. The doctor again. He staggered upright, holding a sealed envelope, wax-stamped and dust-covered. His wrist shook, but not his voice. "I stayed quiet," he said. But before he died, the mayor told me his heart medication had begun misfiring. Too slow when it should beat fast, too fast when it should rest. No one moved. He asked me to keep a few of the last pills, said I should send them to a lab in Abilene. Someone I trained with there could test for toxicity. This morning, I received word back. No belladonna, but traces of digitalis. Extracted from foxglove whispers broke, hands covered mouths. And the person who prepared his medicine for the last 4 months was Thomas Mercer, his eldest son. A name not once mentioned in court. The prosecutor lowered his eyes. The judge set down the gavel, did not strike it. Not because judgment was complete, but because something stronger than verdict had entered the room. Doubt. Reese still said nothing, but his jaw set, as though something he'd suspected had just been carved in stone. The doctor added, "A week before he died, Mayor Mercer changed his will." Struck Thomas's name out completely. One more sentence, one more silence. Then the room cracked open, not into arguments, but into the kind of hush that snow makes when it buries every last path. No acquittal was declared, but the trial was postponed indefinitely. Isabel was released under watch. Reese stood as her surety. No one objected. The town lowered its gaze, no verdict. Only apologies too late to be full, and eyes that would not meet hers again. She stepped outside, did not look back. Reese followed, not close, not far. They said nothing. But from that moment on, Eden Hollow was no longer a place that could hold her. The road out of Eden Hollow had no name. It was nothing more than a rough stretch of earth winding between black pine trunks and fields still breathing out mist. Reese didn't say where they were going. Isabel didn't ask. They carried only 2 aging horses, a leather water flask, and a silence thick enough to hold everything that didn't need to be spoken. The afternoon wind slipped beneath Isabel's collar, carrying the scent of damp earth thawing beneath the season's final frost. She sat behind the saddle, not leaning against him, just clutching the edge of her coat, an instinct formed from a life where no one offered shelter. They didn't stop during the day, and they never looked back. Eden Hollow didn't bid them farewell, and they hadn't waited for it to realize what it had lost. The town faded behind them like an old burn, healed, but still stinging when the threat of rain loomed near. By the time the sun had dropped to an amber smear over the Claridge Mountains, they came to a fork in the road. A crooked wooden sign hung loose, paint nearly stripped, but a few letters remained, enough to read the name, Mercy's Rest. The inn sat beneath 3 old maples, its tiled roof sagging as if bowing to the wind. A single window cast golden light across the porch. The sign overhead promised nothing but a roof that asked no questions. Reese went in first. He didn't knock. His hand pushed open the wooden door like it had been expecting him. Behind the counter stood a woman with silver hair tied low, hands thin but steady. She didn't ask his name, didn't ask where they came from. She only spoke in a voice rough as stone dragged across the bottom of a dry well. End of the hall. Hot water's there. Reese nodded once, then turned back. Isabel followed, not hesitant, but not certain either. She walked like someone who had never trusted the ground to stay still beneath her feet. The room was small, with 2 wooden beds, thick wool blankets, and a hearth already holding flame. She sat on the edge of the left bed without removing her coat. Reese placed his hat on the table and stepped back outside without a word. When he returned, he carried a wooden tray. Not a feast, just a bowl of bean soup, 2 slices of cornbread, a tin spoon, and a warm pitcher of water. He slid the bread toward her without looking up, without waiting for thanks. Isabel didn't eat right away. She simply watched the steam rise from the soup, the scent of black pepper curling into the air like an invitation without condition. After a while, she lifted the spoon, not from hunger, but because for the first time in years, no one was watching her to measure her gratitude. Reese ate slowly. He said nothing. When she pushed half of her portion toward him, he didn't ask why. He took it, quietly, easily, as someone who understood that sharing didn't always need a reason spoken aloud. The fire crackled in the hearth. Outside, wind stirred dry maple leaves. No, one said each other's name. But something had shifted. Not love, not redemption. Just two people sitting side by side, owing nothing, demanding nothing. And to Isabel, that felt as strange as a dream with no shadow in it. She looked at Reese as he poured water into a wooden cup. The firelight touched his face, sharp-edged, silent, but not cold. He didn't reach for her, didn't stake claim. She thought of the times Mercer had growled, "You live because I let you." She remembered meals eaten alone, behind closed doors, enough to survive, never enough to feel seen. But now there was a spoon, a chair, a man who neither pulled nor pushed, only kindness. And to her, that was enough to name as a beginning. That night, she turned her back to him, undressed quietly, and slipped beneath the blanket without needing armor. Reese didn't look, didn't come closer. There was only the soft shift of mattress beneath the weight of a man long used to silence. No breath at her neck, no sounds to startle. Only something gentle enough to make her feel, for once, like she wasn't a stranger lodging in someone else's world. The next morning, he handed her a clean cotton cloth. She took it. No exchange of words, just the simple recognition that she deserved even the smallest of comforts. That afternoon, they sat beneath the wooden awning as rain came. Not heavy, but persistent. Isabel pulled her coat tight. Reese leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, eyes following the beads of water slipping down the railing. She looked at him and asked, "Who were you before Mercer?" He answered without pause, "Still me. Just not pretending." That evening, she combed her hair by the fire. A knot had formed near the nape of her neck, highlighted by the firelight. Reese stood at the doorway. He asked, not pressing, "Need help?" She hesitated, then handed him the comb. He worked through the tangle gently, never touching her skin, never using it as excuse to be near. When he finished, he set the comb down and stepped back. That night, the space between their beds was no longer a barrier. It was a choice, an open space, not a defense. And the next morning, when she woke to the soft scent of warm coffee, she no longer felt like a ghost in borrowed space. Not a witness, not a beggar for affection. She was Isabel, and when Reese handed her a cup of water, she received it with both hands, as if cradling something that warmed more than her palms, the chance to begin again. Morning on the southern ridge came without church bells or roosters. There was only wind, long and low, sweeping across the earth like it was searching for something long buried. The fog had yet to lift. The sun was in no hurry. Reese was tightening the saddle straps, while Isabel combed her hair with her fingers, slowly, as if each strand was a knot from the past that needed patience to unravel. They had left Mercy's Rest at first light, not rushed, but not lingering either. That inn had been a place to breathe, not a place to stay. Reese didn't speak much. Isabel didn't ask what she didn't need to know. The silence between them wasn't strained or brittle. It was a space, wide and quiet, for the unspoken to rest without being broken. On a sunken stretch of trail, as their horses stepped over frost-cracked ground, Isabel spoke. She didn't look at him, just said it like a splinter lodged too long in the throat. "I don't remember marrying you." Reese wasn't surprised. He loosened the reins, letting his horse slow. Wind combed through the damp strands of his hair, carrying the smell of leather and old wood smoke. "Because we never did," he said. "But they'd believe me before they ever believed you." She nodded, just once. Not agreement, not denial, just acknowledgement of a truth that had been there all along. In the courtroom, in the town's gaze, in the way people needed a man to believe a woman. Reese didn't add anything else. He didn't need to. He hadn't asked her to be a wife. He hadn't brought a ring. He hadn't tied her to him with debt or salvation. He simply rode beside her and let her choose where to go. Isabel had walked alone before, through the jailhouse, through the trial, through a sea of eyes that looked at her with nothing but hate. She didn't need to return to Eden Hollow to prove she no longer belonged there. But she wasn't walking alone anymore. By the time the sun reached its climb halfway through the sky, they turned off onto a side trail that wound through low hills. Roots curled out of the ground like old veins. The wind had softened. No more ash in the air. Only the smell of dry grass and brush waiting to bloom. At the end of the trail stood an abandoned cabin. The walls were weathered gray. The roof leaned hard to one side. Windows shattered, but frames still held. In the yard stood an old apple tree, bare, twisted, its roots breaking through the dirt like forgotten handwriting. Reese dismounted first. He didn't speak. He unfastened the straps and tied the horse to a splintered post. Isabel followed more slowly, her eyes tracing each crack in the boards. Not cautious, just observant, like someone used to places where the roof never kept the rain out. He pushed the door open. The hinges groaned long and slow. There was no scent of dead things, no footprints, just dust and a shaft of sunlight falling through warped planks, slicing gold across the hard-packed floor. Isabel stepped in behind him. She didn't ask if it was livable, didn't ask what would need fixing. She just stood there, looking. A soft breeze slipped through the doorframe. Her skirt lifted faintly. On the far wall, a nail had once held something, but now only the faint stain remained. Reese turned, one hand resting on the doorway. "What do you want to name this place?" he asked. There was no expectation in the question, no angle, just space, for her to answer as she wished. Isabel said nothing. Her hand found the edge of a dust-covered table. Her eyes drifted through the empty window frame. Beyond it, the field lay scattered with early weeds, not yet blooming, not yet green, but already rising from black ash. She thought of the years she had lived without a name of her own, only the maid, that one, or the girl. She thought of Reese's eyes, not once calling her by name, but never looking past her like she was something less than real. She breathed in, then out, like it was the first breath that belonged to her. "Ashen Ridge," she said. The wind paused, just for a heartbeat, as if to listen. "The ridge of ash," she repeated, slower, "where the ashes might grow wildflowers." Reese didn't nod, didn't smile, but he stepped outside, picked up a dry branch, and placed it on the hearth that hadn't seen fire in years. "Then we start with flame," he said. He didn't need to say more, just a name, and someone to speak it, not with paperwork, but by staying. If this story chilled you like a winter morning in Eden Hollow, leave a quiet mark in the comments below. Click like if you still believe that truth, no matter how long buried, will one day rise. And don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Love Echoes, where the forgotten are finally told in their own voice.